My name is Audrey Thorne. At 31, I considered my life to be a quiet tapestry woven from simple threads, the scent of chalk dust in my first-grade classroom, the comfort of a well-loved book, the gentle rhythm of life in the coastal city of Port Blossom, Maine, with my husband, Evan. I never imagined that a single, silken thread of deceit, pulled loose, would unravel everything I thought I knew about his family, and in doing so, reweave the entire pattern of my own existence. The unraveling began when my in-laws announced their impromptu Mediterranean cruise. It was a grand, 2-week affair, and they were leaving me to care for Sophie, my 8-year-old niece, who was, according to the family, profoundly disabled, mute, immobile, and confined to a wheelchair since the age of 3. I agreed, of course. For Evan's sake, I always agreed. I had no idea that mere hours after their ship left the harbor, my world, and Sophie's, would be irrevocably altered. Before I delve into the heart of the story, let me paint a picture of the world I inhabited. My sanctuary has always been my classroom at Northwood Elementary. It's a bright, warm space filled with finger paintings, mismatched chairs, and the earnest, chaotic energy of 6-year-olds learning to decipher the world. There, I am a guide, a nurturer, a keeper of small confidences. I help children find their voice. It is a world away from the gilded cage of the Sinclair family. Evan and I had been married for 5 years. He was the anchor of my life, a man with a kind heart and a soul that yearned for calm waters. His only failing, if you could call it that, was a deep-seated aversion to conflict, a trait that became a crippling liability when it came to his family. I loved Evan with a gentle, steady certainty, but his family was a different matter entirely. The Sinclairs were not just wealthy, they were Port Blossom aristocracy, their fortune rooted in generations of shrewd investments managed by the formidable Sinclair Investment Group. Julian Sinclair, my father-in-law, was the patriarch, a man sculpted from granite and ambition. He moved through the world as if he owned it, his bespoke suits a kind of armor, his gaze a tool for measuring a person's worth and finding it wanting. He ruled his family with the same unyielding authority he wielded in the boardroom, his approval a currency for which his children endlessly competed. His wife, Beatrice, was his perfect counterpart. She was a woman of icy elegance, her life a meticulously curated exhibit of social standing and flawless taste. Her silver blonde hair was an architectural marvel, and her smile rarely reached her eyes. She was a master of the backhanded compliment, each one a tiny, poisoned dart. "Audrey, darling," she'd once murmured at a charity gala, "that dress is so artisanal. It's truly refreshing to see someone so unconcerned with labels." Then there was Victoria, Evan's older sister and Sophie's mother. At 36, Victoria had never worked a day in her life, drifting from one expensive hobby to another, her existence funded by a generous trust. Sophie was the result of a brief, ill-advised marriage to a man who had vanished long before the birth. Victoria was beautiful, brittle, and possessed a staggering lack of maternal instinct, treating her daughter less like a child and more like a tragic, sympathy-inducing accessory. Marcus, the eldest son, was a high-powered attorney, a carbon copy of his father in ambition and temperament. He communicated with me in curt nods and monosyllables, as if my middle-class, public school teacher existence was a contagion he was determined to avoid. And caught in the middle of this constellation was my husband, Evan, the youngest, forever trying to broker a peace that was impossible to achieve. More often than not, I felt like the rope in a relentless tug-of-war for his allegiance, and I was losing my grip. From the day I married Evan, I was marked as an outsider. My background was too humble, my passions too simple, my career too noble, but ultimately insignificant in their world of power and influence. Family dinners at their sprawling seaside estate were exercises in quiet endurance. I would sit on their antique dining chairs, a polite smile fixed on my face, and mentally retreat to the happy chaos of my classroom, all to keep the peace for Evan. And then there was Sophie. In the 5 years I had been part of the family, I had only ever seen her as they presented her, a silent, listless figure in a specialized wheelchair. Her official diagnosis, as explained by Beatrice, was a rare, degenerative neurological disorder that had struck when she was 3. They had consulted the finest specialists, of course, but whenever I looked at Sophie, past the vacant stare they all took for granted, I saw a flicker of something else in her deep blue eyes. A spark of awareness, a flicker of intelligence that I would quickly dismiss as my own wishful thinking. I was a teacher, not a doctor. Who was I to question the narrative spun by the powerful and wealthy Sinclairs? The summons to care for her came via a phone call from Beatrice, 3 days before their departure. Her tone was brisk, leaving no room for negotiation. "Audrey, we'll need you to stay at the house and look after Sophie while we're on our cruise," she announced. "What about her nurses?" I asked, a familiar feeling of being managed and manipulated settling over me. "Oh, we had to let them go. A staffing issue, you understand. It's for the best. Family should be the one to care for family. Evan has already agreed it's a wonderful solution." Of course, he had. When I spoke to him later, he wore his familiar, apologetic expression. "Audrey, I'm sorry. They put me on the spot. Dad said it was important for the family to show a united front. It's just for 2 weeks. We can stay in the guest wing. It'll be like our own little apartment." "Evan, what about my job?" "The school year is still in session. It's the school's spring break next week, and for the second week, Dad said he'd have a word with the superintendent. You know how much he's donated to the school district over the years." There it was. The Sinclair way. Problems were not solved, they were steamrolled with money and influence. I felt a familiar wave of resentment, but I acquiesced. Arguing would only cause a rift between Evan and his family, a stress he was ill-equipped to handle, and I loved him too much to put him through it. We moved into the Sinclair estate the day before they left. Victoria gave me a perfunctory tour of Sophie's care regimen. Her medication is 3 times a day. It's all labeled. "Don't, under any circumstances, miss a dose. She becomes difficult," she explained, her focus more on folding a silk scarf into her suitcase than on her daughter. "Difficult how?" I pressed. "Just trust me. The schedule is the only thing that keeps her stable." She handed me a heavy, leather-bound binder. "Everything you need is in here. Feeding tube instructions, medication schedules, emergency contacts. Not that you'll need them. It's all for show, really." That last comment struck me as strangely callous, but before I could ask what she meant, Julian appeared in the doorway. "Audrey, you understand the magnitude of this responsibility. We are entrusting you with our most precious granddaughter. Do not fail us." The next morning was a maelstrom of designer luggage, shouted instructions, and the scent of expensive perfume. The family departed in a fleet of black cars. Not one of them, not her mother, not her grandparents, stopped to give Sophie a hug or a kiss. She sat in her wheelchair by the grand Palladian window, a silent, forgotten spectator to her own family's departure. As the last car disappeared down the long, winding driveway, Evan turned to me. "I have to go with them, Audrey. Dad insists I be there for some meetings with his European partners on the cruise. You'll be all right, won't you?" He gave me a quick, guilty kiss before hurrying to join them, leaving me alone in the echoing silence of the mansion. I stood in the marble foyer, the silence pressing in on me. I looked over at Sophie, at her small, still form. "Well, Sophie," I sighed, my voice sounding small in the cavernous space. "I guess it's just you and me." I had no idea that those simple words marked the beginning of the most important chapter of my life. After the whirlwind of the Sinclairs' departure, a profound quiet settled over the house. I wheeled Sophie into the formal living room, a vast space decorated in shades of cream and gold that felt more like a museum than a place for living. As the care binder instructed, I positioned her in front of the large television and turned on a program of mindless, colorful cartoons meant for toddlers. I spoke to her softly as I did, explaining what I was doing, a habit from my classroom. I'm going to make us some dinner now, Sophie. The kitchen is just through that door. I'll be able to hear you if you need anything. It felt strange, talking to her as if she understood, but the alternative, treating her like an object, felt profoundly wrong. The binder, with its color-coded tabs and laminated pages, indicated it was nearly time for her evening medications. I went to the kitchen, a gleaming, stainless steel expanse that looked as though it had never seen a spilled drop of sauce. The family employed a full-time chef who was, conveniently, also on vacation. I set about preparing a simple risotto for myself and blending the prescribed nutritional formula for Sophie, my movements feeling clumsy and out of place in such a perfect environment. As I stood stirring the arborio rice, a prickling sensation crawled up my neck, the distinct, unnerving feeling of being watched. I spun around, half expecting to see a housekeeper I hadn't been told about. The spoon clattered from my hand onto the marble floor. Sophie was standing in the doorway, not slumped in her wheelchair, but standing on her own 2 feet. Her balance was a little shaky, one hand braced against the doorframe for support, but she was undeniably upright. "Sophie," I breathed, my own voice a stranger's whisper. Then she spoke. Her voice was soft, fragile from disuse, but clear as a bell, with the slight lisp of a child her age. "They want the money. Please don't let them have it." The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white, certain the stress and the strangeness of the house were making me hallucinate. The child, the silent, paralyzed child, had just walked into the kitchen and spoken a complete, desperate sentence. "Sophie," I said again, my voice trembling. You can talk? And walk." She nodded, and her eyes, those intelligent eyes I'd always sensed were there, were now wide and filled with a terrifying mixture of fear and hope. "Please don't tell them I talked. They'll hurt me again." Forgetting the risotto entirely, I moved toward her slowly, kneeling to her height but keeping a respectful distance so as not to scare her. "Sophie, I don't understand. Who will hurt you? What money?" Her small face crumpled with the weight of her secret. "Mommy. And Grandpa Julian and Grandma Beatrice. They make me be sick so they can have my money when I'm a grown-up." My mind scrambled to assemble the pieces of this monstrous puzzle. An entire family colluding to feign a child's disability? It was the stuff of Gothic novels, too cruel to be real. "Come, sit down," I said, my voice gentle despite the storm in my chest. I guided her to one of the kitchen chairs. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." Over the next hour, as the risotto burned in its pot, Sophie unfurled her story. It began with her other grandparents, the Lockwoods, her mother's parents, whom the Sinclairs had always spoken of with disdain. The Lockwoods had been killed in a sailing accident off the coast of Acadia when Sophie was 3. In their will, they had left their granddaughter a trust fund of $2 million to be managed by her mother, Victoria, until Sophie turned 18. Mommy started giving me the quiet medicine after Grandma and Grandpa Lockwood died, Sophie explained, her voice gaining a little strength as she spoke. "It makes my head all fuzzy and my legs feel like noodles. When I tried not to take it, she would pinch my arm really hard where no one could see. Or she'd lock me in the big closet in her room where it's all dark." Tears tracked clean paths down her dusty cheeks. "They told everyone I got sick. But I wasn't. I remember running on the beach and singing songs. Before the medicine, a cold, sickening horror washed over me as she described how she was coached and threatened into silence and stillness. How the family would hold whispered conversations right in front of her, discussing their plans to have her declared mentally incompetent at 18, ensuring they would have permanent control over her inheritance. "How do you know about the money and all of this?" I asked, my teacher's mind trying to process the logic within the nightmare. A flash of pride, fierce and bright, lit up her face. "I taught myself to read better. Mommy leaves her papers out on her desk. I look at them when she's gone shopping. I have a secret book where I write things down." She took my hand, her small fingers surprisingly strong, and led me, still a little unsteadily, to her bedroom. It was a cold, clinical space, more like a hospital room than a child's haven. From a slit she'd made in the underside of her mattress, she pulled a worn floral print notebook and a handful of folded papers. The notebook was filled with the careful, developing cursive of a child who had pieced together her own education in secret. The entries were a devastating chronicle of her life, overheard conversations about the trust, the names of the medications they forced on her, the threats they used to ensure her compliance. The papers she'd managed to pilfer were even more damning. There was a copy of the Lockwood Trust Agreement, bank statements confirming the substantial balance, and, most chillingly, a draft of a psychiatric evaluation prepared by a doctor I knew was a close friend of Julian Sinclair's, outlining a case for Sophie's permanent legal incompetence. I sat on the edge of her sterile bed, the evidence spread out between us, a maelstrom of rage and disbelief churning inside me. "Sophie, why tell me? Why now?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. Her blue eyes, so full of a sorrow no child should ever know, met mine. "Because you're nice to me," she said simply. "You talk to me like I'm a real person." She hesitated, a new wave of tears threatening. "And they've never left me alone with just one person before. It was always a nurse who believed them, who thought I was broken. I hoped maybe you would believe me." In that moment, looking at this small, courageous girl who had weathered years of unimaginable cruelty, a promise took root in my soul, as solid and unshakable as the granite cliffs of the Maine coast. "I do believe you, Sophie," I said, my voice finally steady. "And I will help you. I promise." The next morning, I stood in the gleaming kitchen facing my first real test. The medication schedule, laid out so precisely in the binder, demanded I crushed a cocktail of pills into Sophie's morning nutritional shake. My hands trembled as I held the small, colored tablets. If Sophie's story was a delusion, a fantasy born of a troubled mind, withholding this medication could cause her real harm. But if it was true, and every instinct I possessed screamed that it was, giving it to her would make me a participant in her abuse. I chose to trust the little girl with the brave, intelligent eyes. I made a show of crushing the pills with a mortar and pestle, but when I turned my back to the hallway, I washed the bitter powder down the sink drain. I gave her the shake, my heart pounding as I watched for any negative reaction. There was none. By lunchtime, the change in Sophie was astonishing. The fog began to lift. Her movements grew more confident, her speech clearer. A light I had never seen before flickered to life behind her eyes. She was a child emerging from a long, chemically induced twilight. "I feel better today," she confided, looking at her own hands as if seeing them for the first time. My head isn't buzzing. Together, we began a quiet, methodical search of the house. Sophie, it turned out, was a master of observation, her years of silent stillness having made her nearly invisible. "Mommy keeps her important things in the office," she directed me. "The key is under the blue orchid on the windowsill." Victoria's office was a monument to her shallow existence, all white lacquer and gold accents. The filing cabinet was locked, but the key was exactly where Sophie had said it would be. Inside, we found the motherlode. There were detailed financial statements for the Lockwood Trust. There was correspondence with lawyers discussing how to leverage Sophie's condition to their advantage. The most disturbing file was labeled simply Sophie. It contained a stack of medical records. At the bottom was her original pediatric file, documenting a perfectly healthy, thriving little girl who hit every developmental milestone on time, right up to her 3rd birthday. Then, abruptly, the records changed. The new reports, all from doctors connected to the Sinclair family, chronicled a sudden and catastrophic regression that coincided perfectly with the death of the Lockwoods. It was a fabricated history of a stolen childhood, laid out in black and white. "They watch me," Sophie whispered, pointing to a tiny, discreet lens nestled in the corner of her bedroom ceiling. to make sure I'm being a good, sick girl. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just neglect, it was imprisonment. As we carefully photographed documents with my phone, Sophie shared more of the horrifying texture of her life. The pinches from Victoria if she so much as flinched when a door slammed. The late-night visits from her grandfather, Julian, his voice a low rumble in the dark, reminding her of the consequences of speaking. The way Beatrice would parade her at charity functions, her tragic angel, to elicit sympathy and, I now suspected, sizable donations that never went to any legitimate cause. Grandma Beatrice says I'm their little tragedy, Sophie said, with a chilling, matter-of-fact tone. She says it's the only useful thing I can do for the family. My phone buzzed, startling us both. It was Beatrice, calling from the cruise ship for her scheduled check-in. I took a deep breath and answered, my voice a mask of cheerful competence. Sophie sat beside me, her eyes wide, a silent partner in our counter-deception. Everything is just fine, Beatrice, I said, my free hand gripping the edge of the desk. Sophie is resting peacefully. We're sticking to the schedule exactly. Excellent, she purred. Consistency is everything with her condition, Audrey. Any deviation can have setbacks. I understand completely, I replied, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. After the call, we moved to Victoria's laptop. The password, Sophie informed me, was Chanel 22. Inside, we found emails that painted an even darker picture. Messages between Julian, Beatrice, and Victoria discussed the Sophie problem, complaining about the expense and effort of maintaining the charade. And then, the smoking gun, an email from Julian to a lawyer. The amendments to the trust are critical. Judge Carmichael is a friend. He will see things our way. Once finalized, even if the girl somehow has a moment of clarity, control of the capital remains with us. Maintain the protocol. In Victoria's opulent bedroom, behind a garish modern art painting, we found a wall safe. The combination wasn't her usual password. On a hunch, I tried Sophie's real birthday. The heavy door swung open. Inside, nestled amongst velvet jewelry bags, was a small USB drive. When we plugged it into the laptop, we found what felt like the ghost of the child Sophie was meant to be, videos of her as a toddler on the beach, laughing, chasing seagulls, her blonde curls bouncing. Talking, singing, irrefutable proof of the healthy child she had been. By nightfall, I had a mountain of evidence. But a question still nagged at me. $2 million was a fortune to me, but to the Sinclairs, it was a rounding error. Why risk so much for so little? The answer came from Sophie herself. From the slit in her mattress, she retrieved one last, crumpled document she hadn't shown me before. It was a letter, penned in an elegant, masculine script, from her grandfather, Alastair Lockwood. It had been mistakenly included with the trust paperwork sent to Victoria after his death. It was meant for Sophie on her 18th birthday. The letter spoke of love, of legacy, and of a secret. The $2 million trust was just a seed. The bulk of the Lockwood estate, an immense fortune of over $30 million from the sale of their tech company, was held in a separate, sealed trust. It would only be released to Sophie on her 25th birthday, under one condition. She had to have been deemed mentally competent and have taken legal control of the initial trust. The Sinclairs weren't playing for $2 million. They were playing for 30. That night, I moved Sophie into the guest suite with me, far away from the prying eyes of the cameras. As I tucked her into a bed with soft, lavender-scented sheets, a cold, hard resolve settled in my heart. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was a rescue mission. We are going to fix this, Sophie, I whispered, stroking the hair back from her forehead. You are not alone anymore. The next morning, Sophie and I sat at the small breakfast table in the guest suite, a pocket of the house free from surveillance. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. For the first time, we were not just victim and rescuer, but partners. Sophie, I began gently, if you could have anything in the whole world, what would you wish for? Her answer came without hesitation, a litany of simple desires that broke my heart. I want to go to a real school, she said, her eyes fixed on the sunlit garden outside. I want to have a friend over to play. I want to learn to ride a bike. She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. And I want my mommy to love the real me, not the pretend sick me. Despite everything, this little girl still yearned for her mother's love. It was a stark reminder of the deep, complicated wounds she carried, wounds that money could never heal. I knew then we couldn't do this alone. While Sophie was engrossed in a chapter book, her appetite for reading was insatiable, I stepped out onto the stone patio and called my oldest friend, Maya Reed. We had been roommates in college, and she was now one of the most respected child advocacy lawyers in the state. I laid out the whole unbelievable story, my voice low and urgent. My God, Audrey, Maya breathed when I finished. This is monstrous. It's straight out of a Victorian novel. If this is true, it's one of the most calculated cases of abuse I've ever encountered. It's true, Maya. I have the proof. I'm looking at a video of her running and laughing on a beach. Okay, listen to me. Maya's voice turned sharp, professional. You need to be incredibly careful. These people are not just cruel, they're powerful. They will try to destroy you. Document everything. Make backups. Don't confront them. Let me handle the legal strategy. We need to time this perfectly. Hanging up, I felt a surge of relief. I was no longer an army of one. But as I went back inside, Sophie looked at me with anxious eyes. Are you going to call the police? Are they going to take me away? I knelt in front of her. No. We're going to do this smartly. We are going to make sure that when this is over, you are safe and free, and you get to choose what happens next. The next few days were a strange blend of clandestine activity and joyous discovery. By day, we were spies in our own home. We organized the evidence, uploading encrypted files to a secure server Maya had created. We found more cameras, discovering the entire system fed back to a server in Julian's home office. We worked in the blind spots, the guest suite, and the garden, our secret headquarters. In the afternoons, we reclaimed a piece of Sophie's stolen childhood. We baked lopsided chocolate chip cookies in the cavernous kitchen. We played endless rounds of Go Fish on the living room floor, her delighted laughter echoing in the formal, stuffy space. No one ever played a game with me before, she confessed, her expression a mix of wonder and sadness. They just turned on the TV. I began to prepare her, gently, for what was to come, coaching her on how to tell her story to a stranger, how to be clear and brave. None of this is your fault, Sophie, I told her over and over. The grown-ups failed you. You did nothing wrong. The question of Evan gnawed at me. He was my husband, my partner. But his family loyalty was a fortress I had never been able to breach. I decided to test the walls. I called him one evening, keeping my tone casual. How's the cruise? I asked. Incredible. We're docked in Santorini. Dad's meetings have been a huge success. How's everything with Sophie? I took a breath. It's been interesting. I'm a little concerned about the amount of medication she's on, Evan. And I came across some of Victoria's paperwork about a trust fund. The warmth in his voice instantly chilled. Audrey, you're a teacher, not a neurologist. Her medication is complex and necessary. And her finances are a private family matter. But what if? Stop, he cut me off. Just follow the instructions Victoria left. Please don't create problems where there aren't any. It's completely inappropriate for you to be snooping. The click of the phone ending the call was like a door slamming shut in my face. The fortress held. He had chosen them. A cold, hard certainty settled in my heart. I was alone in this, at least for now. It was me and Sophie against the world. The night before the Sinclairs were scheduled to return, we made our final preparations. Maya had a complete copy of the evidence. We had a plan. We had a code word, sandcastles, that Sophie could use if she felt threatened. We sat in the kitchen, eating bowls of Rocky Road ice cream, another forbidden pleasure. Sophie looked up at me, a smear of chocolate on her chin, her expression solemn. What if they win? What if they make me go back to the chair? I reached across the table and took her small hand in mine. That is not going to happen, I said with a conviction I willed myself to feel. The truth is out now, Sophie. It can't be put back in the box. I didn't tell her about my own deep-seated fears, of Julian's power, of a legal system that could be swayed by wealth and influence. I didn't tell her that justice was not always guaranteed. Tomorrow will be very hard, I said as I tucked her into bed. But you have been brave for 5 years. You just have to be brave for one more day. She wrapped her arms around my neck, her small body trembling slightly. Thank you, she whispered into my shoulder. Thank you for believing me. I held her tight, my heart aching for all the hugs she had missed. Always, I promised. Now sleep. Tomorrow is a big day. I had no idea that tomorrow was only a few hours away. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I was ripped from a shallow, anxious sleep by the sound of the heavy front door creaking open, followed by the murmur of familiar voices in the foyer. They were back. A full day early. A cold dread washed over me. I raced to the guest suite and found Sophie sitting bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide with terror. They're home, she whispered, her voice trembling. They do this sometimes. A surprise visit to make sure the nurses were following the rules. It's okay, I said, my own heart hammering against my ribs. Remember the plan. We stick to the plan. I helped her quickly into her own sterile bedroom, positioning her in the bed just as the binder dictated. I will not let them hurt you, I whispered, squeezing her hand. I had just smoothed her blanket when Victoria swept into the room, looking immaculate even after a transatlantic flight. What are you doing in here? She demanded, her eyes immediately suspicious. I thought I heard a noise. I was just checking on her, I said, my voice remarkably steady. You're back early. Father's business concluded ahead of schedule, she replied, her gaze flicking between me and the still form in the bed. Has her routine been maintained? To the letter, I lied. The logs are on the kitchen counter. She seemed placated for the moment and swept out of the room. I gave Sophie's hand one last reassuring squeeze before following. The entire Sinclair clan was assembled in the grand living room, a formidable tableau of wealth and power. Julian and Beatrice were seated like monarchs on the silk sofa, while Marcus paced restlessly by the unlit fireplace. Evan stood near the entryway, his face pale, refusing to meet my eyes. Audrey, Julian said, his voice a low growl. I trust my granddaughter has been well cared for. She has, I said simply. I would not fire the first shot. Beatrice's eyes, cold as sea glass, narrowed on me. How curious. Victoria did a thorough inventory of the medications before we left. By her count, several doses appear to be unaccounted for. My blood ran cold, but I held her gaze. I administered everything as prescribed. Perhaps there was a miscalculation on your end. Perhaps, she conceded, though her tone dripped with disbelief. A thick, tense silence descended, broken by a sound that made every head snap toward the doorway, the soft, deliberate sound of footsteps on the polished hardwood floor of the hall. And then, she appeared. Sophie, standing tall and straight in her pajamas, her hair tousled from sleep, her eyes clear and defiant. Hello, Mommy, she said, her small, clear voice cutting through the silence. Hello, Grandpa, Grandma. I'm not going to be sick anymore. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. Then it exploded. Victoria let out a strangled gasp and lunged toward Sophie. Marcus swore under his breath. Beatrice pressed a hand to her chest, a flawless portrait of manufactured shock. Julian's face turned a dangerous, mottled red as he rose to his full, intimidating height, his fury directed entirely at me. What have you done? He roared. I moved instinctively, placing myself between him and Sophie. I've done what you should have done years ago. I stopped poisoning an innocent child. Victoria grabbed Sophie's arm, her painted nails digging into the girl's skin. She's delusional. She's having an episode. She needs her medication. No, Sophie cried out, yanking her arm free with a surprising strength. I'm not taking it. I know what you did. I know about the Lockwood money. The name hung in the air like a detonation. The room fell silent once more, a vacuum of stunned horror. Audrey, Victoria said, her voice now strained, terrifying calm. My daughter is a very sick little girl. You have interfered with her medical care, and you are causing her to have dangerous hallucinations. She isn't sick, and she isn't hallucinating, I shot back, my voice ringing with a conviction I didn't know I possessed. She's been a prisoner in her own body for 5 years because you are all too greedy and cruel to let her be a child. I know everything. The trust. The doctors you paid off. The surveillance cameras. The plan to have her declared incompetent. Everything. Julian took a step forward, looming over me. You are hysterical. You have no comprehension of this family situation. Oh, I comprehend it perfectly, I said, my gaze sweeping over all of them. I've seen the videos of her as a toddler, Julian. A happy, healthy, talking toddler. Before you all decided she was worth more to you broken. Beatrice tried a new tack, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Audrey, dear, this has clearly been too much for you. The stress of caring for a special needs child can be overwhelming. Why don't you and Evan go home? We can handle this. It was then that Evan finally spoke, his voice wavering. Audrey, maybe Mom is right. Let's just go. We can talk about this at home. There's nothing to talk about, Evan, I said, my heart breaking at his weakness. Your family has been systematically abusing a child, and I will not be the person who walks away and lets it continue. Victoria's composure finally shattered. You snooping little nobody, she shrieked, her mask of civility gone. She lunged for Sophie again, a small prescription bottle suddenly in her hand. You will take your medicine right now, you ungrateful little brat. I moved faster, blocking her path. Get away from her. As I pushed Victoria back, Julian's hand shot out and clamped down on my arm, his fingers biting into my flesh like a vice. That's assault. Marcus, call the police. We're having her arrested for trespassing and endangerment. Go ahead, I said, my voice shaking but firm. I'm sure the Port Blossom police will be very interested in the file of evidence I've compiled. Evidence? Marcus sneered. Your word against ours? Who do you think they'll believe? They'll believe the bank statements. They'll believe the emails. They'll believe the sworn affidavits from the nurses you fired who were suspicious. And they'll believe the forensic accountants who are, as we speak, tracing how you've been misusing the trust funds. I was bluffing about the affidavits and accountants, a desperate gambit Maya had suggested, but it landed with the force of truth. Most of all, I said, looking directly at Julian, they will believe her. I gestured to Sophie, who was standing, terrified but resolute, by my side. Julian's face was a mask of fury. I will ruin you, he hissed, his voice a low, venomous promise. Your little teaching career will be over. Your name will be mud in this town. Dad, what is she talking about? Evan pleaded, the foundations of his world finally beginning to crumble. What's going on? Before anyone could answer, the doorbell chimed, a clear, piercing sound that cut through the tension. Marcus peered through the sidelight window. It's the police, he said, his voice flat. There are 2 cars. The color drained from Julian Sinclair's face. For the first time since I had known him, he looked uncertain. He strode to the door, composing himself. There has been a terrible misunderstanding, officers. He stopped short. Standing on his doorstep were 2 uniformed officers, a plainclothes detective, and my friend, Maya Reed, holding a briefcase. Mr. Sinclair, Maya said, her voice calm and professional. I'm Maya Reed, counsel for Sophie Lockwood. I believe this is the part where you invite us in. The next few hours were a surreal whirlwind. While officers separated the family members for questioning, Maya and I sat with Sophie and a gentle, compassionate child protective services worker named Mrs. Evans. In the quiet study, away from the turmoil, Sophie told her story, her voice gaining strength and confidence with every word. Evan, looking utterly shattered, listened from the doorway. He watched as his niece recounted the threats, the pinches, the lonely, silent years. He saw the truth, stark and undeniable, in the eyes of a child. The final, crumbling of his denial came when Victoria, in a desperate, last-ditch effort, screamed at the social worker, "She's mentally unstable. It's part of her condition. Her father was a drunk and my mother was a depressive. The girl is damaged goods." The sheer cruelty of the statement finally broke through Evan's lifetime of conditioning. He walked across the room and knelt in front of his niece. "Sophie," he said, his own voice choked with tears. "Is it true?" "All of it." Sophie looked at him, then at me. I gave her a small, encouraging nod. "Yes," she said simply. "They wanted the money." Evan rose to his feet and turned to face his father. "How could you?" he asked, his voice filled with a pain that was awful to witness. "She's a child. She's your granddaughter." Julian, ever the pragmatist, saw the game was lost. He tried to pivot. "It was Victoria's idea," he began. "She was unstable after the divorce, desperate for—" "It was you, Daddy." Victoria shrieked, her loyalty evaporating in the face of her own ruin. "You said the business was in trouble. You said the Lockwood money was our only way out. You found the doctors. You got the medicine. You told me what to do." The confession, raw and ugly, hung in the air. The detective, who had been listening silently, simply nodded to one of the officers. The great Sinclair family had finally, irrevocably, imploded. Mrs. Evans arranged for Sophie to be taken to the hospital for a full evaluation, and I refused to leave her side. To my surprise and relief, Evan insisted on coming with us, his hand reaching for mine in the back of the car. It was a silent, desperate plea for an anchor in the storm that had just capsized his entire world. I took it. At the hospital, as doctors confirmed that Sophie was a perfectly healthy, albeit traumatized and malnourished, little girl, I knew the confrontation was over. But the long, quiet battle for her future, and for ours, was just beginning. 3 months later, I sat on a polished wooden bench in a sun-drenched courtroom, Sophie's hand nestled firmly in mine. The judge's voice was a gentle drone as he finalized the papers granting Evan and me permanent legal guardianship. The intervening time had been a crucible. The case against the Sinclairs had become a local media sensation. Julian and Victoria were facing a litany of felony charges. Julian's attempt to bribe a key witness had only deepened his legal quagmire. Facing a long prison sentence, Victoria had agreed to testify against her father, sealing his fate. Beatrice, while avoiding criminal charges, had become a social pariah, her carefully constructed world shattered. Marcus's career was in ruins. The Sinclair empire had crumbled, brought down by the quiet courage of an 8-year-old girl. For Evan and me, the path had been just as challenging. We had entered intensive counseling, working through the deep wounds of his denial and my lonely battle. He had severed all ties with his family's money and started his own small architectural firm, determined to build something honest with his own 2 hands. We were rebuilding our marriage brick by brick on a new foundation of radical honesty. But the most profound change was in Sophie. With every day that passed, she shed another layer of the fear and silence that had defined her life. Therapy was helping her process the immense trauma, and she was slowly, cautiously, learning to trust the world again. We had enrolled her in a small, nurturing school where, after a shy start, she had begun to blossom, making her first real friends. Her laughter, once a sound I could only imagine, now filled the small, cozy house we'd bought in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. The week before, she'd had her first sleepover. Watching her and her new friend giggle over popcorn and a movie, I felt a wave of such profound gratitude it nearly brought me to my knees. We had saved her. As the judge's gavel fell, marking the official end of one chapter and the beginning of another, Sophie squeezed my hand. "We're a real family now," she whispered, her eyes shining. "Yes, we are," I whispered back. Outside, Maya met us with a triumphant smile. "You did it, Audrey. You gave her back her life." Inspired by Sophie's ordeal, Maya and I had used a portion of the recovered trust funds, now managed by an impartial court-appointed trustee, to establish the Lockwood Project, a small foundation dedicated to advocating for victims of medical child abuse. It was a small light, but we hoped it would help other children lost in similar darkness. That evening, as Evan flipped burgers on the grill in our new backyard and Sophie taught her friends a complicated clapping game, I watched the scene, my heart full. This was it. This was the life I had fought for, not just for her, but for me, for the person I had become. The woman who had learned to find her own voice, to set boundaries, to fight for what was right no matter the cost. Later, after Sophie was asleep, her face peaceful in the soft glow of her nightlight, Evan and I sat on the porch swing. The air was cool and smelled of salt from the nearby sea. "She asked me today," Evan said quietly, "if it would be okay to call me Dad." Tears pricked my eyes. "What did you say?" "I told her that she could call us whatever felt right in her heart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I told her that we would be honored." I rested my head on his shoulder. The journey had been harrowing, the scars were real, and the healing was far from over. But in that quiet moment, I felt a sense of profound peace. We had faced the storm and emerged on the other side, battered but whole, bound together by a fierce, protective love. The greatest lesson I learned was not about the depravity of greed, but about the incredible resilience of the human spirit. It was about the power of a single person choosing to believe, to listen, and to act. I had walked into that cold, silent mansion as a reluctant caregiver and walked out as a warrior, a mother, and a woman who finally understood her own strength. And in saving Sophie, I had, in the truest sense of the word, also saved myself.